Hello and welcome to Three Skulls Tavern. I'm Matt, your host, and tonight I am going to be interviewing our Coriolis GM, Toni. Thanks for joining me, Toni. Before we get into the interview, though, just a quick shout out to our sponsor, World Mill, who are a survey. Oh man, they're a God, how do I say it? A server, hosting server for the Foundry Virtual Tabletop, which is what we're using for all of our actual plays. So yeah, links to World Mill are in the description below if you want to check them out. And that's it. So, Toni, thanks for joining me.
It's a pleasure, as always.
Yeah, this interview is really just we used to do tavern talks on our old campaigns, and with the increase in how often we're running actual plays, no longer monthly, now every 2 weeks, there's not really any time to do tavern talks without significantly increasing workload. So I thought it would, the way I kind of wanted to get around that was just to have a chat with our GMs, have one chat with our GMs. We might do a second one after the end of a campaign, I was thinking as well, just to do a recap. But the idea is to have a chat with our GMs and to talk about things like, well, have a chat about yourself, chat about the game itself. So the idea again is to do this after we've played a few sessions, talk about the campaign a little bit, that sort of thing.
It's horrible. Don't join. No, just kidding. Do join.
So this is the first one. So yay. Toni, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your GMing background? If anyone's watched the Coriolis show, they'll have heard a little bit already. Like you mentioned, Vampire, or was it just Vampire? Or was it Worlds of Darkness? Anyway, go ahead and tell us a little bit about your role playing career and your GMing career.
That sounds very serious business. But yeah, so I got into RPGs. I would say quite early. I mean, I don't know, but for me it was quite early. I think I was around 15 or 16 when I was in high school, actually, with some friends of mine that we were playing there. And one day I saw them playing with magic cards, actually, which I didn't even know what they were doing. Like they throw in these cards and say, that they were tapping mana and doing things very weird. And I was like, why do you do this? It's very weird, but I kind of like it. And that actually, I realized that they were doing other things besides Magic the Gathering. And they were also playing Stormbringer, which is kind of a very 90s game using the basic role-play system, which is the 100 dice. So that's when I started really role-playing. It was very simple campaigns, a lot of just hacking and slashing. I mean, Stormbringer, what else are you going to do? And then we continue into Dungeons and Dragons, which I guess, most people at that time was advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which I was very, very much into it. And then after that, I said, well, I would like to actually do my own stories and, make up my own ideas and try to to entertain my friends. And then the game I started was Call of Cthulhu, actually. It was one of my first games. Cool. Yeah. So the version number 2 or something like that, that was 1995, something like that. Mm-hmm. So, and I don't even think I was playing it right most of the time. I think I was doing very also hack and slash Call of Cthulhu, which now probably would be Pulp Cthulhu or one of these other guys. And very quickly, I started, moving into Vampire. So Vampire was, for me, one of the biggest hits, also around the 90s, 95. At that time, I was already in university. And, I found the Vampire and Masquerade, the second edition in Spanish translated, not very easy to find. And I got into love into all the part that was the narrative part of the game, not only the hack and slashing. And then there was something that for me I was not doing it enough, and I realized this is what I want to do. I like the idea of having these different clans with kind of political intrigues and, being more a story more than just rolling dice to kill things. And basically, I think Vampire the Masquerade is the thing that I've played the longest, together with Aquelarre. So Aquelarre is a Spanish game that is it's also a D100 game, very much like Call of Cthulhu or Stormbringer, very similar. But the interesting thing about it that is based in my country, Spain, in the 1300s, when there was this melting pot of different cultures and religions, and taking into account very much like Ars Magica, where all these mythological and all these demons and angels are real. And it generates also a very nice, interesting mix of different games. You can play games that are very hack and slash if you want, but also very much intrigue or detective, trying to find, who has taken the little boy of this town, who has enchanted this woman, and that's it. And then recently, actually, through Matt, I started learning more about free league games, actually. And that's what led me to Coriolis now, and which is my very first free league game that I'm GMing ever. So, so apologies if you see stupid things when I'm GMing, because of course it's like a system that I'm quite new. I mean, I'm used to pools of dice, of course, but it's a different system with a different mindset and more cooperative and collaborative. I think it shifts a little bit from what are the traditional games, if you want, in a way. And I like Coriolis. Well, maybe we are going too much ahead, but that would be more or less the thing. So yeah, I've been GMing for a really long time because most of my friends, they never wanted to GM. They only wanted to play and kill things. So it was me who was like, okay, who's preparing every Saturday a game for my friends? Just bring Coke and chips and I will do the rest. And we used to play actually in the kitchen of my parents. My parents at that time thought, what are you doing? They thought that was mad, but they were happy at least that I was not outside doing drugs. They were happy that I was in the kitchen drinking Coke with chips and playing with dice. They thought it was weird, but it's like, drugs.
It could be
RPGs.
Worse.
Yeah, they were okay. Thanks for that. Thanks, Mom.
I have very conservative Christian parents, and the very first RPG that I played was Star Wars, the Western games. And when my mom read the book, when I brought the book home, she took it away and had to read it. They had to. I was very strict. And when she gave it back to me, she'd torn the entire chapter on the Force out of it, and it was like, are you worried that I'm gonna want to really use the Force? Like, I don't think it works, Mom. I was like, I might only be 15, but I'm pretty sure I don't think the Force is real. But okay, whatever. Like, I only wanted to play Han Solo, so I didn't care too much. But at the same time, like, I look back on it now, I'm just like, what was she thinking? It's ridiculous. Anyway, cool. We've played Aquilare together. You ran Aquilare for me. I actually recorded it, but I still have not edited the video and put it up onto YouTube anywhere. That's still on my to-do list for the Mud and Blood podcast. But yeah, we did a one shot which turned into like a 3 shots.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was really fun. I really like historical settings anyway. And it's a really cool game. So
yeah,
that's how we first played together, actually. Games
exactly.
Together.
Our first time, so beautiful.
Yeah. I think we hadn't played after that until the Vaesen game, if I remember correctly.
No, I don't think so. Yeah. Vaesen was the first one. Yeah.
And then Twilight 2000 you were in. Yeah.
Yeah, to Twilight.
Yeah. So you've been on 3 of the 4 campaigns that have 5 campaigns now that have run on the channel. So that's pretty good going. I think you tied with Charlotte. I think Charlotte's in. Nah, Charlotte's
also quite almost
3.
Twilight,
Forbidden Lands, Twilight,
Forbidden
and
Lands.
now Coriolis as well. So yeah.
Oh.
So regular.
Yeah.
Cool. You kind of mentioned Coriolis and the setting a little bit. Like, what are your thoughts about the game? Like, let's look at the game as a whole unit, not just the setting. We'll talk about, feel free to talk about the setting as well. But what are your thoughts on the mechanics? And I think from my perspective, with you as a GM, I've run Coriolis as well myself. And for me, darkness points are one of the huge draws of it, right? But how do you feel about things from a GM's perspective?
I would say I was going to say exactly the same thing. I think darkness points and the way that it's set it, that you can use this kind of tokens to actually, do things to the players. And also, it's not only that you feel like, okay, I have these points that I can use, and they give you a lot of different examples of how can you use them, from very simple things like, okay, you're shooting the gun and then the gun is not working anymore, to something more complex, which is bringing up the secret or the personal problem of this character and making it happen right in front of you. And I think this gives you a very good way of narrating and to bring in all these different stories. Like it's going to make it nicer at the end without having you to do it in a separate way. I like that. It's because, when you're GMing, I mean, I always do it in Alien or in Vampire or other games. You always bring these kind of things to the game, but sometimes it feels a little bit like, oh, you're punishing your players. You're doing it on purpose to punish them, and some people don't understand. I mean, if you have a long-standing group, they know you, it's okay. But sometimes you feel like, oh, maybe they're gonna feel I'm doing this on purpose. It's something personal. And I kind of like that you have this kind of mechanical thing that you can just use it, and it has a basis that is based on also on the setting, on part of this dark between the stars. That what it is, we don't know, but I like that brings this kind of also mythic kind of force, if you want it, like the Jedi, and you can use it. I really like that part. For the rest, I find it, well, like many dice pool. What I like is, for example, it's not like Vampire, that you can have, I don't know, millions and millions of dice, and it makes it like, it's so easy to fail when you have so many dice, because the ones are actually subtracting from the successes. So at some point, I remember playing sometimes, and you roll like 12 dice and you don't succeed. It's like,
oh, that'll happen here. Don't worry, that'll happen.
Yeah, I know, but I like that, the maximum number, I think, is 12 or something like that, if I remember.
No, there's no maximum. There's no maximum.
But then if you go over the number, I thought that you get a plus or something. Maybe I get messing things up.
You might be mixing it with the Genesis, maybe. That's the Genesis thing with 12.
Maybe I'm messing with the Genesis. Sorry about that. Damn it!
But no, there's no maximum. Nothing happens. Like, I remember in our campaign, we had a couple of 16 dice rolls.
Really? Mm-hmm. Because I really feel that it's very hard to reach such high numbers. Maybe because we have very low level.
If you have, it mainly comes with the face people who are really good at manipulation. If they then have a significantly higher reputation, and they're getting the reputation, what's the thing called, the leverage?
Leverage, yeah.
So you could theoretically get like a big massive boost of some, like, say 6 to 8 extra dice on top of what, like, if you started with like 3, the maximum you could start off with in character creation, if it's a career skill or a archetypes concept skill, is 3, and you put 5 in empathy, you're starting with a dice pool of 8, and then you can
but I think it's only there in manipulation, because I think because it's also a very social game, kind of empowers this kind of a skill, and everything relies on this skill manipulation. There's no seduction, there are no other kills or intimidation for that sake. I mean, you can use force if you want to, but I think everything is there. But for the rest of the skills, I find it very hard that you will have very high numbers on range combat. I mean, you can, or melee, because you have this, but it's the bonus to the. I highly doubt that in other situations you will have really high numbers.
I think the average tends to be between 4 and 6 dice for most rolls. Yeah.
That's my feeling. Also, looking at the pips that you have on the sheet,
and when it goes higher, it's usually you're very, very skilled in something, and you have some sort of advantage going your way, which then kind of makes sense. Like, well, then the odds are stacked in my favor, so why not roll 8 to 10 dice? And even then, like, sometimes they just come up with zeros.
Exactly. Then you can push, which I think is more like it's more like a free league thingy, which you don't have it in other games. And I really like that the push is linked to the darkness points too. Yeah. Which I think it's not like you're subtracting from your physique, because it happens in other games, and I like that it's not linked to that you are stressing out or you're getting injured. It's more on that you're giving tokens to the game master to do things to you, and I kind of like it in a way that this idea of how you pray to push, and I don't know, I like. I really think that for me that's the highlight, the darkness points, and then the rest is more like typical free league game, I would say, from my experience. And then obviously I always like science fiction. I mean, for me the 2 best settings at this point in my life is either contemporary. Because it's also easy for me to maybe project myself into that, or science fiction, because I kind of like I like movies, science fiction movies, and in a way, maybe for me, it's also easier to project onto that than maybe go medieval. I mean, I can do it in Aquelarre because I kind of feel more, connected to my country, and I know because you actually look at the map and you say, okay, I'm gonna play on this town. And then you go to Google Maps or you look at books and you can find information about that town in the 1300s. But in other settings like fantasy, like if you go and like, yeah, I don't care about these settings, like Forgotten Realms, yeah, whatever. I really don't feel any connection whatsoever. So I like that, and I actually like because they have this Middle Eastern vibe. For me coming from Spain also, we have it's part of also what I play in Aquelarre. We had these roots also of Middle Eastern, I mean North Africa mostly, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of also of my country and some of the things that I see. So that's why also I feel attracted to Coriolis. It's a personal thing.
No, that's cool. Yeah, I lived in Pakistan as a teenager, so for me that's I think a big draw for Coriolis as well, as it's touching on a lot of like my childhood experiences and a lot of nostalgia there. Yeah, I'm right with you.
I think it's all. Yeah, it's because it's true. It's easier to project. Sometimes, maybe we are getting old and it's harder for us. I don't know. And you need something more grounded on reality somehow, something that helps you to project. And I think drawing from your personal experience to help, or even because then at the end of the day, as a GM, you need to be able to describe what's going on and kind of the setting, and the more background you have, or the easier it is for you to do this. I think it's also easier to bring the players to create with you, to role play with you, and I think that for me that's the best thing of playing role playing games at the end of the day. I mean, that's what I enjoy. That's why sometimes I even forget to roll dice. Like happened the other day that we were trying to manipulate each other in a way, or I was trying to manipulate your character, and I even forgot to, because I think the role play was well done, and so why roll dice? But that's me as a GM. I usually, if I like it, it's like, we go for it.
Yeah, cool, definitely. And I think I can kind of see that, like you talking about your entry point into role-playing games, starting with some slightly darker stuff like Stormbringer's Elric, right? Yeah. And then Call of Cthulhu. I mean, yeah, fantasy is quite different. Is a quite different feel and genre from all that. I know you said you played AD&D as well, but I don't know. I'm kind of the same. Like, although saying that, I totally get the appeal of fantasy and sort of space opera, sort of space fantasy kind of stuff. Like Star Wars as a setting, I mean, it was my first role-playing game. But I'm a bit of a Star Wars nerd. I fully appreciate how ridiculous the setting is. I tried watching it with my wife when we had been together for like a few years, and I was like, "You've never seen Star Wars? Let's watch it together." And I was just cringing all the way through episode 4, like, "Oh, this is bad." And she was like looking at me, constantly like, what is, like, all the stupid bits. You're like, yeah, it is kind of embarrassing when you watch it with somebody who's not into science fiction, and it kind of lost a bit of its shine. But still, it's like, for me, it's a nostalgia thing, and I know the setting really well from having played it as a kid and all the rest of it. And I think for a lot of people, maybe that's part of it. Like, if you're big into D&D, and you're big into the published stuff, then you're there's fiction to do with the Forgotten Realms and stuff. You can, and video games, massive video games that are really enjoyable, so you can really immerse yourself into the setting and learn that. And then I think the difference is with where it's escapism versus a sort of cathartic sort of immersion, right? And I think with contemporary stuff and science fiction, you get a bit more of that cathartic immersion because it's a bit closer to home. Whereas with Star Wars or with like typical fantasy, it's like it's so divorced from reality that you can it's just pure escapism. And they both have their appeals, right? But I'm with you. I love the darker stuff. For people who are watching who don't know about my other half of my role-playing time, I'm a co-host on the Mud and Blood podcast, which is completely devoted to dark and gritty games, because that's what I love. But anyway, cool. The setting itself, like, how have you found getting into it as a GM? Because I know you hadn't looked at it before starting to think about like playing the game. So
I think until Yeah, I think until and because I remember that we had this discussion and it's true. Like I had looked into it because I was thinking of running the game for my group, but the problem is that my group is only two people and me, so we are three. So playing Coriolis for with three people, one of them being the GM, is kind of tough. I think, with the idea that you need to get a ship and a crew and
Yeah.
da da da. So I thought, okay, it's not good. So I look at it, but not, let's say, skimming through. And it's true that I started like looking at it seriously. Probably was September, October last year when or maybe November even. So quite late actually before we started the campaign. So in fact, I had to read the book several times. It's not something that you know. I think you need to read it and reread it and start fitting all these different parts of the setting because there are many things. I mean, there are things that I still me myself I don't fully control, like the the idea of the icons. Okay, how do the icons are represented in the society? How this? I mean, I know that everything is connected, like the factions. Some factions are more religious, if you want to call them this way, and some others that are less religious. And then you have also this difference between the Cenithians, or kind of the more pragmatic or imperialistic, and then the old ones, the first comers that have been there, more conservative. So getting to learn about this and trying to integrate the factions and the religion, if you want, and this diversity, because at the end of the day, we cannot forget that I think there are 32 systems or something like that, if I remember correctly.
It's 36 systems. It's exactly
Voilà,
a D66 table.
Voilà. So almost there. But and then you look at the map and you're like, and in some ways it feels they describe in the book only 3 or 4 systems. I think Mira, Algol, Kua, and Coriolis, because Coriolis is such emblematic. I have it right here, the Coriolis station, and I think that's it. And then tiny bits of the different places, so you're also a little bit overwhelmed, like all this empty space that you need to fill in a way. I mean, there are many things that they are filled, but where do you start the campaign? What do you do? And I think this was one of the first questions we discussed, like, and I remember you were telling me, just go somewhere that nobody cares, that is very far away from everything, and because then you can build whatever you want. It's easier. And then I actually did the opposite, which is the funny thing, because I also felt like overwhelmed. And I remember I was afraid of starting in Coriolis, which I really didn't grasp yet. But then at the end, I think it's working okay, and how I think it's working. But it's true. Like every time we play, I need to reread the sections and make sure that I understand, or at least I get impregnated on the feeling of what is this district that we're going to be playing today, or what is this faction that we're going to be interacting with today. So I think but it's like any games. Like I remember when I was starting with Vampire the Masquerade, of course, I didn't understand what are these different clans, what is this Mascarilla, this Anarchist, this Sabbath, and then it takes you time. But yeah, of course, once you start playing, I think you start getting into it, and then you get interested. Okay, what are these? What are the these guys doing here? What do they do this? What do they do that? And then you started posing these questions, and then you make the setting your own setting. I mean, what I also like a lot is try to keep the world very cohesive. So for example, if I run a campaign, I would probably, if I run a second campaign, I would reuse and I would make my world, and I say, well, these are things that happened in the previous campaign. The new players or the new group or whatever might actually go back and see some of these things that happened before, because I kind of like creating my own setting from their own setting. But yeah, I think it's a little bit daunting sometimes because it's very rich. I mean, you love it, but I'm sure that you also took your time to probably get into it. Maybe it was. I think
for me, the big draw was the sandbox element of it, and I was immediately drawn to the empty spaces, the empty systems. And I thought, ooh, cool. I had no desire to. I haven't read the chapter on Coriolis, and I haven't read the chapter on Kua. Despite running a campaign, I've read the book. I would say I've read the book like 3 or 4 times, cover to cover. Except I've only ever skimmed through those chapters because I'm kind of like. Everybody plays there, and it's kind of cool. There's fiction that was written through the Kickstarters, which I've read as well. There was a short novel and a novella. Yeah. I read both of them. They're both based around Coriolis and Kua, and it was kind of like, it's cool. Like I understand those areas and how they work, but I've got no desire. I want to be a bit more in the remote areas, because that's always anyway, that's just my thing. Like
But no,
I
but
like
that's
that.
maybe what I think is because I think once you get out of the main systems, it feels like a Star Wars in a game. Because
A bit,
that's
yeah.
one of the things I like of a Star Wars. Like, you can go to a planet and it's very primitive, and you can do that in Coriolis if you
Yeah.
want to. Like, there is also this disparity in technology. I mean, the gear, you have the primitive, ordinary, the big technologies that are handled by one of the biggest factions. So you can go very primitive if you want to, like even like a Star Trek, like you can go to a new planet and it's just a small tribe doing their things, and you come with your ship and they're like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And you can also go very high tech if you want to.
Yeah.
So and I think that's also a big interesting thing for me, which also feels very, let's say, realistic. I mean, if you have this gigantic empty space, I mean, obviously there's going to be disparities in between cultures, between planets, and that you can actually explore it in a way. So I understand that, and
I think for me as well, if you have if you're away from if you're kind of can do your own thing, you can also pick and choose the faction with the factions. And the thing with Coriolis and Kua is that there's so much intrigue and so much faction interplay going on there that for players, like, I don't assume my players will ever read the core rulebooks of the games I run. So trying to, like, I would just feel I think it would be overwhelming for a lot of my players. So by controlling the systems that are like controlling my own, or like creating my own little system, and then deciding on what factions I want to be introducing at what points and which planets, and then slowly expanding the third horizon in that way, also had a big appeal. I mean, you can do that with like the systems that are outlined in the book outside of Kua and Coriolis. They also have more limited faction play, so you can quite easily do that there as well. But I don't know. For me, it was just kind of like cool.
It's true that for me, but I think, no, I mean, I think my issue with that is that because I'm not so used to this kind of sandbox. I know that the sandbox part is very big on free league games. Basically, Forbidden Lands is one big example of that, for example. But so it's true that it's something that I haven't explored, and in that sense, I mean, the campaign that we're running probably is going to be a very traditional campaign in a way. I don't think I'm going to add any sandbox elements. I mean, I'm using it from time to time to inspire myself, just looking at the tables. It gives you ideas. Okay, what else could I add? Okay, and then you look at the tables, and then and then you realize, well, there are things that are very obvious, like ruins. If you are doing exploration, obviously ruins of the first com, or ruins of the previous horizons, or ruins of this. But it's good to have them there because it kind of helps you at some point. And it's true. Like, I don't think we'll do this in the campaign that we're doing at this moment. But I totally understand. Like, if you have a crew, like a group, and they have their ship and they want to play this, as you were doing probably on your previous campaign, like you just want to be going around and you just give them total freedom. You do whatever you want. We'll adapt as it goes. I think that's, for a GM, is also kind of very, I don't know, it gives you freedom, like, to relax. You don't need to stress about, you need to be, I don't know, give them surprises every game. Like, oh, I'm going to be the smart one. I'm going to put them something that they don't expect. And I mean, the surprise element is already included in the sandbox in a way, because it can be anything. Just a roll of dice, and then you can modify a little bit. But it's true that I think because we are so used also to traditional games, for me, it's also kind of hard to move into that direction. I think probably we'll have to play as a player first and try to experience that sandbox element to maybe after bring it to my own games as a GM, because it's something that you don't see in other systems, basically.
Yeah, not the big ones, I think. Definitely
Not the big ones, yeah.
But yeah, like I started with Mutant Year Zero, and that is an absolutely pure sandbox. And when Coriolis came out and I played that or ran that, it was kind of like I approached it from the Mutant Year Zero sort of basis. Like, I was looking at the rules, how it changed from Year Zero, and that's why the sandbox elements of it got me really excited, because it was like an evolution of what they'd done in Mutant Year Zero. But cool. I think the other thing that I really like about it is, rather like that, a lot of people think about this like you read the book and the default is you start with a ship, right? But you don't have to. We're running a game with 3 players and we don't have a ship. One thing I've always wanted to do with Coriolis is to run a cyberpunk style game, because there are corporations in the game who kind of control entire planets, who are, if you look at just as specific planets that are in the lore of some of these detailed systems, you've got planets which are basically being completely like all the natural resources are being stripped away by the consortium. The syndicate are kind of operating behind the scenes, and you've got, usually it's like the first come settlers on the planet who are living in slums and are not happy about the situation. And it's like, that's just cyberpunk. It's got all the right tropes of cyberpunk. It's just in the far future. It's not in our solar system, but the ideas behind cyberpunk are there. And you could easily have a cyberpunk feeling campaign on one of these planets where there's been a lot of development. You have like high tech, but there's a massive gap between the between the people living at the poverty line and the people who are there work like with the consortium or whatever. And that's just really, there's lots of interesting stuff you can do there. You don't have to have a starting ship. You can play the typical sort of cyberpunk type of characters, anarchists or like whatever. It just would work really well within the setting. And one of the things I wanted to do when the Free League Workshop came out was to write a cyberpunk guide, like a starting campaign guide, like a couple of pages long, just to say like, here's a planet, here's the pages in the book that detail it, and here's some kind of campaign, here's a campaign premise, some adventure seeds, and some advice on how you might want to run it. I just never got around to it, but anyway, I'm derailing this conversation.
No, but it's a good one. I like that. I think we discussed about this also when I was preparing the campaign as ideas that you had and that you thought that were interesting also to explore. That I agree with you. It's not exploring most of the mainstream thing out there when people run Coriolis. And actually, I agree with you, because also in the book, they tell you there's all the biosculpting, there's all these different implants that you can have. Although there's not a lot of information. I think there are only a couple, but it gives you some ideas like what could you develop. And it's true, like you could go full cyberpunk, because it's true, you could take the Legionnaires and you say, okay, this guy is badass mercenary with, I don't know, an implant in the arm and, I don't know, maybe super reflexes and things like this. And I think it would totally work.
I don't think it'd be hard to expand the cybernetics that are available as well if you wanted to kind of really lean into it. There's not a lot of like extra rules involved with them at all. It's super easy to hack or to like expand on. But yeah, anyway, I think that's the kind of for me, the beauty of the setting is that it's easy to do. You could do like Firefly sort of style stuff in it really easily. You can do what we're doing now, which is the intrigue, because of all the factions who are like squabbling with each other. It's really easy to do intrigue. It's got all these amazing tables to help a GM come up with plot hooks and stuff, like literally throughout the entire like setting chapters of the book, and you can do cyberpunk sort of feeling stuff. So it's, I don't know, it's really versatile, I think. Or just traditional, more like the campaign I ran was in a remote system, traveling on a ship through the system, trying to get to one of the planets on the far side, and kind of the stuff that was encountered along the way. It felt a bit maybe like harder sci-fi, perhaps. It wasn't very action heavy or anything. It had a big kind of action thing at the finale, but yeah, anyway. Yeah, so
well, you also were journalist, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah, that's right. So
it's also different. I think this is one of the first discussion. It's something that I like of the we didn't talk about it before, but part of the system, you start with a group concept. You don't start with a character, which in most games is like, find the characters you want to play, and then you need to figure it out. Okay, how are you going to interact? Okay, so you want to be this bad boy, but then the other one wants to play the good boy. Okay, so this is going to bring problems to the table. Yeah. But here on Coriolis is totally the opposite. Like, okay, what do you want to play? What is going to be the theme of this campaign? Are you going to be pilgrims? Are you going to be fugitives? Are you going to be truckers? And then based on that, then you develop the rest. And I think that's also the beauty. It forces, I mean, in a good way, it forces you to say, okay, think about what you want to play this run.
Yeah.
And then, as you said before, take the sandbox tools and get it done. Have fun with your friends. And I think that's great. Actually, it's something that is missing in any all the other games I've ever played, unless you force it as a GM. You say, okay, guys, what do you want to do? If not, everyone is gonna, if you play D&D, they will come, okay, I'm gonna play this crazy dwarf with 20,000 spells, and the other one's like, and you're like, oh, for fuck's sake. I'm gonna accuse you all.
My personal way of handling that as a GM is to give a campaign pitch to my players, and I very focused, so I'm giving them a group concept idea when they're choosing the game. But I agree, like group concepts for me are vital in any game. I kind of Forbidden Lands doesn't really do it at all. It's like if you look at the free league games, all of them have it sort of built in, other than Forbidden Lands. Forbidden Lands is your adventurers, and that's kind of it. Okay, why do you have a wolfkin and a halfling and a dwarf and a human and an orc in a party together?
Figure it out. They meet in a bar. No.
Well, there's a table, like there's this additional booklet that gives you like how you met, but it's random rolling, and it all feels a bit like, well, you're just rolling some random stuff and kind of trying to make it stick. It doesn't work so well. As much as like when I run Forbidden Lands, what I wanted to do, we didn't do it in the end because this channel is all about trying to stick to the book as much as possible. We wanted to do the random character generation, and if you're doing random character generation, the life path system in Forbidden Lands, there's no way to have a group concept because you're rolling randomly for every element of your character.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to explore that. But normally, if I was to do Forbidden Lands again from a fresh campaign, I wouldn't do that, or I would rewrite the random tables, and I would say, right, we need a reason for, like, let's have a group concept for why you're adventuring in the Forbidden Lands, because then you get consistency between the characters, you get relationships between the characters that don't feel really superficial, artificial. And you get a ton of, like, for the GM, you get like a ton of adventure hooks that aren't artificial or superficial, because it's tying the group together, it's tying them into the setting as well, and it's just brilliant. And I love Coriolis for that. Absolutely agree. Like that's a big draw.
Yeah, that's what we did in a way, no? I mean, in a way, I think I also pitched you 2 ideas. I mean, I don't know if we can, but probably.
Yeah, let's talk about that. One of the topics I want to talk about was campaign prep with you. So. Go for it.
Okay. So basically, I think I had 2 ideas of what I would be interested in running as a GM, and we pitched it. I pitched it to you one day, and the 2 ideas were, the first one is the one that you are seeing now, which is basically problems. We call it, the way I was calling it at that time was problems at home. So basically meaning that you all belong to the same town and that develop into the same family, and basically something is happening back at home. And then that actually developed into, no, actually we are our siblings, and actually one of the siblings, which in this case was the youngest one, it's in trouble. We don't know what's going on. And that was the interesting part, because we like it to discuss what is the drama between the family. You've been apart from each other, how their relations have evolved since you last met, and how is this going to develop during the game, and what are you going to be able or capable to do for your family. And I think, because also that's also close to many of us, like your family, you interact with them every day, with your siblings, etc. So I think it's also something that it's cool to see how you bring that to the table, and I actually kind of liking it. It was not my favorite pitch, but now I'm starting to really dig it, honestly. And then the other pitch I had, because we had the idea, like playing on the known space. It was kind of constraining you a little bit. Then my idea was like, okay, let's say that you are land crashing into a planet, and basically you are going to be survivors of this ship that just crashed in this planet, which the idea was like, it was probably going to be very primitive. And then the idea was like survival. You need to survive in this place you arrive. There might be even tribes or factions that you didn't know about it, and then you have to figure it out, either kind of Star Trek like, you're going to help that the factions don't kill each other, maybe, and you try to be the mediators, and that was one of the ideas. And another idea was like, go full crazy darkness, things like this. Didn't happen, but it would have been a much darker game in that sense. But also, I think narratively might have been drier, because it's more about rolling dice, surviving in the wilderness, running around. In that sense, it would have been less interesting and less close to what I'm used to, which is more social and narrative games. So that's why I was hesitant, because I was not sure how much action we could have. But I think what we are getting, it's good, and I think it's going to go in crescendo once you uncover a little bit more what's going on behind all this, which you're starting to see a little bit, but I mean, it's only 2 sessions. I mean, I'm hoping we can develop that. Obviously, there's a limit. We cannot run the campaign forever and ever. I mean, I think the longest campaign I ever run in any game was 3 years, and I don't think we're gonna do this in the channel. I mean, Matt will kill me if we've run for 3 years the same campaign.
Well, no, there's a turnover of games I want to keep. So yeah,
Exactly.
every game that we introduce starts with 10-ish sessions. That's the pitch kind of to the GMs who are going to be running.
Unless we pray to the icons, and maybe we get to extra. No, I don't know.
Yeah, but like if there's demand and everyone wants to come back and do it, then we can do a second season and stuff later down the line. But this is still a new channel, so we haven't come around to season 2s yet. But yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, that was the two pitches. I think they were two very different, but also quite interesting. And I don't know. And these are ideas that I always had. That I wanted to run kind of a family, or going back to your hometown and helping. I don't know why. I always felt that it could be a very interesting, because you have something to fight for, or something to you have a, it's not like random character telling you, oh, do this. Okay, yay, fun.
I think the other campaign pitch also might have struggled a bit, because Coriolis isn't really a survival game like some of the other Free League games, and there isn't much in the way of survival rules, other than I think there's a survival skill off the top of my head.
Yeah, but that's very simple.
It's a single skill, and it doesn't really have a lot to do with. Like, I think the only time it talks about survival is in the skill chapter, when it's talking about the skill, and it's like
that's it.
It's like a half a column of advice. So I mean, there are other. I mean, we could have hacked some survival rules from Forbidden Lands or something.
Just role playing. My plan was to. Yeah, my plan was to role play a little bit. I mean, obviously the survival aspect was going to be only, let's say, first 2 sessions. Kind of, you just which is happening in Alien. Actually, we are not spoiling anything, but you actually crash landed on Alien last week, not 2 weeks ago, no, 3 weeks ago. No.
We haven't crash landed anywhere yet.
I don't know. You're right. You're on the way. Probably.
We've just left. We just left our ship. We just left our ship.
It's true. It's true. But you escape with a pod. It's true. But okay. So there is no rush. It's true. But still. So the idea that they had, as I said before, was like maybe 2 sessions more about, okay, you're crashing, you need to survive the first nights, and then put you into some exploration that could lead to meeting these probably primitive tribes or situation. Was not clear, factions or just primitive tribe, and somehow you need to help them to help you. So a way to find a ship to get out of the planet, and then that could lead to some problems. I don't want to spoil a lot, because maybe I will use part of it.
It's probably a good idea as well, because that has some similarities to the Alien campaign. And that would have been a bit weird to be running 2 sci-fi games with very similar premises at the same time. Actually, so it's probably quite nice we've got this difference here. Let's look at the actual campaign rather than talking about the survival one. The prep that you did for the campaign, can you talk a little bit more about like tools that you used for it, the approach that you sort of took with it in terms of looking at building up factions and obviously I'm a player in this game, so don't spoil anything. But people might be interested in how you prepped for the campaign before it kicked off.
Yeah. So basically, as I said before, I'm not using all the sandbox elements. So I actually had in mind kind of a very traditional campaign, because I also felt it could be probably better kind of as an actual play, like to have kind of a start, kind of you figure out what's going on, and then a finale. So in fact, the campaign is separated in 3 acts. So you are in what I call in my super secret notes, act number 1, and you are moving into what's going to be number 2. So for me was this idea of, okay, we are going to start with kind of the meeting of the siblings and try to figure out how they work together, which is a kind of a very traditional concept too, like figuring it out how you interact with these people, why how you're gonna continue working together, and you have a glue that ties you together, which is Nasrid. And one of the things that I had also in mind was to create these memories, because obviously you have no memories of what happened before. I gave you some handouts to help you out, kind of develop this relation with time and go back to those memories. But as you saw, when I'm derailing here, it's not a campaign. But the idea was also for me that during this act number 1, all these kind of memories or all these kind of interactions, and that you had the space to create your sibling and how this sibling relates with the other. So obviously, because we are running, as you said, 10 episodes, then, well, we'll do as much as we can. But of course, if I was running this for a home group and with more time, probably I would try to make you suffer more and try to role play these interactions. But that was the first part of the act number 1. And then the act number 2 is basically, well, understanding what is the situation that Nasrid has gotten into, how this affects you. I mean, the siblings, the Sahiris, and basically kind of, in a way, try to find how you solve the situation would actually lead you to act number 3, which is you take action. Yep. So for me, act number 1 is the introduction. You get to know each other. Act number 2 is like you start having the tools to fight against what's coming. And then number 3, I hope, is you taking the lead and saying, yes, we are going to get this done. And whatever happens, happens.
Okay.
And that's how, so yeah. And my plan is also to be, to use the factions. I mean, and I don't think there are going to be millions of factions because, yeah, it's impossible that you bring all of them and it's also, I think it's also not very, very good idea because, it's easier for you to grasp 2 or 3 factions every game and to understand them. And then you can, if we were playing longer, then maybe every campaign would be different factions. So we get to know the whole setting. Yeah, but sure. I think now I'm going to limit to 2 or 3 factions, which I find interesting for what I want to do. And we are starting to see, we are playing a lot with the Syndicate. In the first act number 1 is Syndicate for now. It feels like very much, it's starting to feel very much like a gangster thing now. Yeah. I mean, I think episode 2 was like more into the gangster underground part, and then it will evolve in the next acts as I see it. And so when I was thinking, I actually split my notes. So I started with a simple doc, and I started, okay, 1, 2, and 3. What's going to be happening in each one of these different acts, and kind of have a timeline of what were the ideas. But obviously also I didn't go into a lot of details in some cases because I knew that you would probably derail the game, which it's not, for me, it's not derailing, it's actually making it more interesting and creating the narrative that also makes you feel that this setting or this campaign is yours. So for example, as I said, I think episode number 1, I think we discussed at the end of the game, like I think I was improvising for the last 30 or 40 minutes, something like that, because you did something that I was not expecting that you would do. Honestly, I didn't think about this possibility, but I thought it was awesome. Actually, I really, now when we finished the game and the day after I was looking at my notes, I was like, this is actually awesome, because it actually helped me to introduce other things that I was like, I don't know if this is gonna work. But now because you did this, actually it works. So you actually made my life easier for episode number 2. And I think it's gonna continue like this. My plan is like to keep the ideas I have the core NPCs there, and then depending on your actions, I think it's going to be a dynamic campaign. But I think most GMs do the same thing.
I think that's a great way to handle sort of more structured campaigns, is to not be too strict with the story beats, right? Because no plan ever is going to survive contact with the players. And if you've got, I've read a lot of GM advice over the years as well, and I've read a lot of people who say never ever. In fact, books will even will give this as advice in the GM section and say, like, never plan more than 1 session in advance. Like, don't plan for campaigns. But I don't think that's true. But there is something to it, which is I'm quite a fan of sandbox. When I do sandbox campaigns, I try to have an idea of a one or two meta plots with progress trackers, whether that's clocks or whatever,
Oh yeah.
that'll be running in the background, and they
Mm-hmm.
could theoretically just run in the background. The PCs may never interact with it, but it'll still be happening in the background, and it will help to make this setting feel a bit more alive.
Yeah.
And I think that's to me a nice way of handling things as well, is having a plot which is quite strongly hooking your players in from the beginning, but allowing yourself to not be too stuck to that. And that's actually, like, my Coriolis campaign was exactly that. I had them as journalists. They were investigating a specific story, and they are in a ship which they are indebted to the person who's their employer for the journalism. So it's like they kind of have to do this job. They could just run off and do whatever they wanted, of course. But there was a strong motivation within the confines of the campaign I'd set up to keep them kind of going in a certain direction. But I didn't at the beginning, I didn't have a huge amount planned out what I wanted. I just kind of left it a bit open-ended and be like, I think this is going to be something that's going to happen when they get to that first planet, but it's not going to be, that's going to like be the first, as you said, like that'd be the end of Act 1, and then it'll open up some other stuff happening. And who knows if they're going to bite at that or they're going to turn around and go somewhere else. And they kind of followed the breadcrumb trails. But yeah.
But I think it's good. It's like when you play, like all these open world games where you have the main quest and then you follow it or you don't follow it, but it's there and there is this path. If you want to finish the game in 10 hours, you follow that path and you have it. But then you can move around that and do all the side quests and spend 100 hours playing the game if you want to. So for me, I approach campaigns. I mean, I know obviously actual plays I think have a different style, but I approach campaigns exactly like that. You have a motivation, as you say, like a conduit that will make them, if they want, that's the direction. And then obviously they will deviate and maybe they will do things that you don't expect, but it will enrich that campaign and that narrative, and that it will make it progress. And I think you need to be not fighting against your players. I mean, when I was playing D&D, I was a terrible GM. I was like, no, you're not doing what I want and you're not fighting the bad guy. You die. I mean, I was not killing them, but I remember being very mean. I think one player told me once, "You are really very mean. Like you kill me," and I was like, "No, I didn't." But I was like, "Yes, I did. Yes, I did." And I learned. I was also 15. Okay, so give me a break. But I think you learn that no, actually, you are building all this together, and it's not your story. You have an idea, and because you are the GM, okay, you have a responsibility to make them have fun and etc. But at the end, you need to be flexible and agile to say, okay, this is the story. This is maybe could be the end. But we'll see how it goes, and you embrace that chaos and that. To make it yours and integrate all that. And I think I understand now that that's the right way of doing, or else the way I feel better now. I mean, thankfully, I think it works better and you have better experiences with your players too.
Yeah. I think that's key. Is having something there, having a plot, like a plot hook or a group concept there at the start that your players are hopefully going to be interested in. And we signed up for that. We signed up for being siblings, and that our brother was going to be missing at the start. So that's what's bringing us this place together, and it gives us a very strong motivation to do something. Like, we could just jump on a ship and just like, well, that's our brother, sorry. But then it's kind of like, how does that make sense? We're all bought into it, and we're kind of following the breadcrumb trail, but we're not gonna we're gonna do kind of stuff that you can't think of, because that's the beauty of role-playing games. But yeah, cool.
And I'm not that smart. I cannot imagine every single thing you can do, what you will do. I think, as you said, you need to have your story, and you need to have this strong setting that helps you to figure out what can you do if you need to improvise, and then have all these different NPCs, and then repurpose them if you need them to actually make things fit into this story in a way. And I agree. It's at the end, I feel like if you were writing together a book, and sometimes I really, when I finish campaigns, I'm like super sad. I'm like, oh, I wish I could write this down and sell a book based on what we just did, because I think sometimes there are really fantastic things and really awesome things that you're like, wow, this would be a book I could actually read if it was well written, not the mess that you do when when you're role playing. That you do a nice story, but it's a pity. I always thought, hey, man, I really need to keep good journals.
That happens.
Yeah.
Like the Expense series was a role playing campaign. Yeah, I mean that's a cool thing. Like you hear a lot of you hear like one of the common things with authors when it comes to like writer's block is exactly like not knowing where to go next in the story. And with role playing games, you have that interaction with other people. You have that chaos where the story never. It always is going in different directions. And
you need to give me a second because my kid is calling. I'm sorry about that.
No problem. And cue the elevator music.
Sorry about that. I just woke up.
No problem.
Yeah. I'm hoping he goes back to bed. So I apologize.
Cool.
Kids getting old.
So yeah, I think there's a lot to be said there. I've thought the same thing. Like I've had some very cool campaigns. Not always when I've been GMing, also when I've been a player with my home group, where I was like, man, that was incredible. And the world building. My home group always play, most of the GMs in my home group, because we're all GMs, run their own settings, and there's some really cool world building that goes on. There's some really cool stories that come out of it. It's kind of like, man, that would make a really cool story. I don't know. And you hear about authors who also say they create characters, then they just write them, and they don't plan a plot. The characters come alive and they do unexpected things. So yeah. Anyway, we're kind of coming up to the 1 hour mark, so I think we'll leave it there.
Okay.
Yeah. Any kind of last parting things you wanted to say?
Actually, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to let me GM and do it live. I mean, it's a new experience for me, and it's a challenging one, but I'm enjoying it quite a lot. And so just say thank you. And I think the group is great, and I think we're starting to develop the story together. Yeah. So it's great. And I have to go. The kid is calling again.
No problem. All right. Cheers, Tony.
Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers. Bye. So thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button on the channel, which helps to grow the channel, and hit the like button if you like the video, and leave a comment if you want to talk about anything we discussed in this interview. And I think that's all the bits I need to say. I'm on Patreon now, so there's a lot of stuff I'm doing behind the scenes, both with this channel and with some writing stuff that I'm doing. So if you're interested in that, check out the Patreon. That's also really helpful, because that provides a little bit of financial support to me for some of the stuff I'm working on. That's it. Thanks for watching, and catch you in our next episode, or our next video, whatever that happens to be that you watch. Cheers.